let's talk about the permanent bar. I still have a lot of confusion from people when talking about the permanent bar, especially based on unlawful presence. There are essentially two ways to accrue the permanent bar. One is if you enter the United States without inspection after being removed from the United States. Let's say you have an expedited removal, you leave and then you re-enter without inspection, or you have like a full removal order, you leave and then re-enter without inspection. You're going to be subject to the permanent bar. But the second is based on accrual of unlawful presence, and that's the one I want to focus on. So in this scenario, people, let's say, have never had any incident or encounter with immigration, but they don't realize that they still could be subject to the permanent bar. And now you cannot overcome the permanent bar. There is no waiver in the United States. If you're subject to the permanent bar, you need to leave for at least 10 years before you can seek re-entry. So this is based again on scenarios where people accrue the permanent bar solely through unlawful presence in the U.S. In other words, they've never been detained by immigration. After April 1st, 1997, which is when the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act took effect, people started to accrue unlawful presence, which was going to prejudice them in the future. If you accrued 1 year of unlawful presence after April 1 of 1997, then you left the United States and then you re-entered again without inspection, you would be subject to the permanent bar. It does not matter that you maybe entered the first time with inspection. So let's say you enter the United States with a tourist visa in 1998. You stay in excess of a year after the permitted time of stay. So let's say they gave you 6 months, but you ended up staying in the US 3 years. At that point, you've accrued more than 1 year of unlawful presence. And let's say you leave the United States and you re-enter again without inspection. You would be subject to the permanent bar. It doesn't matter that the first time you entered with a visa or with admission, okay? Because you've accrued more than 1 year of unlawful presence. Likewise, if you have entered prior to April 1st, 1997, but then you entered without inspection. In other words, that it didn't really matter, that accrual didn't start, but then you stayed until 2000. You've accrued now more than 1 year of unlawful presence post 1997. You leave for 5 years, but then you re-enter again without inspection. That individual is subject to the permanent bar. So again, this is the permanent bar based on accrual of unlawful presence. And a lot of people think, well, I wasn't detained, so it doesn't matter. It still matters, okay? That those instances of being present in the United States without permission and accruing unlawful presence will still count against you. So it doesn't matter if there's been an encounter or not, you would still be subject to the permanent bar. So I hope that this clears up when someone is subject to the permanent bar based solely on that accrual of unlawful presence.